Hey everyone, welcome back to episode 8 of season 4 of Educator Yarns. My name is Jess James, director of the Koori curriculum, and I am here with Belinda Huntriss, from Freshwater Education.
Hi guys.
Before we jump into today's episode, I'd just like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that you are all listening in on today. Belinda and I are both on Young country on the Central Coast. I'd like to pay our respects to elders both past and present and acknowledge any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander listeners. So as you know, we have been unpacking the early years learning framework, and today we are wanting to talk a little bit about outcome 2, children are connected with and contribute to their world. And I was just having a bit of a yarn with Belinda before we jumped on to record this session, and I was sharing with her what's sort of resonating with me personally with this outcome at the moment is that whole idea about social justice and whether or not politics belong in the classroom. So over the last couple of days, the Koori curriculum Facebook page has been targeted by I'm pretty sure they're a white supremacist group anyway, that I'm meaning hundreds of negative trolling comments saying that we're indoctrinating children and brainwashing them and that we shouldn't be. And those are the milder comments of just some of the outrightly racist stuff that we're also having to read. And so we've just been diligently going through and blocking and deleting and reporting comments and profiles and all of the things that we usually have to do during peak times like Reconciliation Week and Sorry Day. But at the moment, at the time of recording this episode, it's currently not a peak period of around an Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander significant date. So it's a little bit out the blue, but it's quite obvious that our page has been shared to some racist groups because just of the sheer volume of waves of people that we're experiencing at the moment. But it does sort of prompt that bigger question, does politics belong in the classroom? And so Belinda, what's your take on that? Does politics belong in the classroom?
Well, I think, when we were just yarning before, Jess, I did sort of mention that pretty much anything that we're doing in Aboriginal communities when we're fighting for rights or if we're advocating for change or whatever it might be certainly can be interpreted as being political. So I think just in terms of anything that we do seems to be put forward that way. So yeah. I think if we're talking about do politics belong in the classroom, I always make sure, because sometimes, I've been teaching about, for instance, at the moment I'm doing a stage 3 unit about frontier wars. And often I think to myself, what I like to have, even though I can easily add it into where it fits into the curriculum, I like to make sure that I have some kind of backup to say that if I do get questioned about why I'm doing this, because as you know, because we're still as a nation coming to terms with the true history of Australia and, post-colonisation and what happened during that time, I often find, as you're sort of saying, Jess, when you start to talk about some of those issues or events that happened or whatnot, even around the stolen generations, people seem to still be there is a group of people in the community that is still oh, that never happened. It's literally it's so out in the open now, government policies and practices, and do you think the government's going to apologize for something that they didn't do? It's just absolutely ridiculous and also just so disrespectful. But I do always like to just have something to back me up so that if I do get questioned by parents or push back, and I know in some of the mentoring I've been doing, educators have been saying, that they have been getting pushed back. One of the educators I was mentoring mentioned that they've been reading the book Somebody's Land by Adam Goods.
Oh, yeah.
And a parent literally came in and asked them to remove the book, that it's not appropriate, that they shouldn't be teaching it, that they didn't want their child to be exposed to that book, which is an amazing book, really, let's face it.
Right.
So I always encourage people to have, for lack of a better word, a backup or something to say, well, hey, this is actually in the curriculum. We are expected and we are actually being assessed on our ability to do this. So
that's right. And I think you need to know your curriculum and know where it says that in the early years learning framework, where that says it in the teaching standards and so forth, so that you are able to back yourself up as to why you do what you do. And that is in part why making it very clear that you have a reconciliation action plan, or that you have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander policy or an inclusion policy, and speaking to that as part of your enrolment process. So families are very much aware of what you do and what you don't do and why you do those things, you know, and what informs, what informs your practice and pedagogy, because it's not your values and beliefs versus theirs. There are some things that we can do in an early learning service, just like we have regs on safe sleep practices that, you know, we can't put a child to sleep, you know, with a pillow and a bottle and 3 stuffed toys and blah, 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 and all of these things, you know, because it's against safe sleep practices. So if a family comes in and says, well, this is what we do at home, we can very gently say, okay, like, whilst we understand that, let's look at what the regs say here, and this is what we have to do. Legally, we're required to do these things. So it's an education thing for them, but it's not about saying it in a judging sort of way. So, and I think, so just like we have those regs in terms of health and safety, we also have them in terms of inclusion. And so just making it very clear as part of your information to families as well from the get-go. But I think one of the statements in the EYLF, or like the sub-outcomes, I don't quite sure. I wish they would just call them like 2.1 and 2.2, just so it becomes easier for us all to navigate. But anyway, so it says children are connected with and contribute to their world. Children develop a sense of connectedness to groups and communities, and an understanding of their reciprocal rights and responsibilities as active and informed, and I think that's key, informed citizens, you know. And obviously, like, we do things in an age appropriate way. Like, I'm not proposing that we necessarily need to tell 2- and 3-year-olds about the stolen generation, nor am I proposing that we need to tell 4- and 5-year-olds about the stolen generation. However, there is a point, you know, in the primary curriculum anyway, I think it's about in year 4. I don't know how the stages and stuff, they're stage 2, there you go, stage 2, yes. What is that unit called? It's like first contact or something. What's it called? I only remember when my kinship daughter was doing it. So yeah, first contact, whatever. So they're talking about, you know, the invasion of Australia, and I'm very clear in saying it's the invasion, not the colonization, because there was no treaty. So it was the invasion of Australia, and they're talking about, you know, the settlers and the first fleet and so forth. And with my kinship daughter anyway, like, they took her down to Botany and looked at the boats, and they did all those things on like the first fleet and blah 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 blah. And but there was nothing, like, absolutely, like, next to no mention of the truth of it, you know, of Australia's invasion and the impact that had on, you know, mob and so forth that were in the Sydney region, the Gadigal people and the smallpox epidemic. There was none of that. None of that was being shared. And she sat, you know, an Aboriginal child in a mainly white classroom, you know, living, I guess, in like a form of out-of-home care away from her, you know, parents, and I would argue a direct result of past acts of injustice that have affected her intergenerationally, to be in the position that she was in. So she has every right to be informed of her history, and understand the impact eventually that has on her and her family and her community, the impacts of that. So I think Aboriginal children have every right. And obviously, when you're talking about history and so forth, you know, I refer back to the Reconciliation Action Plan episodes that we did at the beginning of this season, talking about having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the classroom and why you might have an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person in the classroom. And that should be to collaborate with them on how you approach sensitive aspects of your curriculum and how that should be managed, and also, you know, consulting your Aboriginal families that they are aware that this topic is going to be breached, and what you're proposing, how you're going to do that, what would they like you to do, et cetera, et cetera. I think that all has to be done very sensitively. However, I don't think, like why aren't we truth telling? Like, what is it? Like, is it a denial that it happened? Like, it makes you feel uncomfortable that that's what happened? Is that the, like, I really struggle to understand what the issue is. I think for educators, the hesitation more so is about, A, is it age appropriate, and am I actually informed enough to be reflecting the history truthfully and accurately? Am I confident enough in my own knowledge of events to be able to share that correctly with children? That's what I more so see, which is why books like Somebody's Land by Adam Goods are needed, because it is that resource that we can stand behind. And I think it does say it in a very age appropriate way that's perfect for preschoolers. It doesn't go into it doesn't go into the details, but it just talks about it. It's an introduction into that part, which can be scaffolded, you know, as children move through the education system. No?
100%. I think too that as we're becoming, like, as a society, more educated around like that truth telling, that true history of what happened post colonization, I think like a lot of people are still struggling with this whole idea of unpacking what they thought they knew, you know. So it's like that process of, they've already learned something at school. It was like very, very basic, if anything, but they have this idea in their head about, you know, how our country has developed. And then all of a sudden you learn something that's like completely turns that on their head. So then they're unlearning what they knew. And then they're, I guess, like then still working through that and processing that themselves. I think that's part of it too, is that coming to that realization. And then how does my story fit into that? And also, you know, do I have, like, I know, because I'm teaching at a university at the moment around Aboriginal health, and it's mainly around cultural safety and health. And some of the, you know, we're going through all of that content, and, you know, students have to do like reflections and things like that. And it's so interesting sort of seeing how they're kind of addressing how they feel about what they've learned, and then kind of looking at, you know, now I feel guilty. Do I have a, you know, like, is this now my place? Like, am I, you know, how do my ancestors play a part in that? How do I come to terms with that? It's quite complex, isn't it?
Totally complex. You know, like I've had sessions, you know, with directors where we've been talking about Australia's Black history, and, you know, this particular director that I'm thinking of was probably in her 60s or something like that, and she was reflecting on her childhood and how the sort of privileged area that she lived in, and how all of the families that went to her church, all of those families had an Aboriginal nanny that lived with them and helped raise their children. And it was almost like a penny drop moment for her in that session, and a bit of a freak out is like, do you think that they had been removed, you know, from their families? Do you think that they were forced to be there and all that sort of thing? And like, you know, definitively nobody can say that, but the idea that yes, they were part of this church and so forth, and that all the families, like, I would say more than likely yes, that was that. And obviously, you know, this person had huge amounts of guilt and emotions regarding that. And obviously the family probably thought that they were doing potentially the right thing. You know, who knows, you know, taking in, you know, what they saw as a destitute Aboriginal woman, you know, like who knows what they thought or why they were doing what they were doing, and all that sort of stuff. And I think it's very, very complicated, and there's a lot of emotions that people have with that. And it's not until there's sort of that catalyst in their life that they stop and reflect critically on, you know, their lives and their experiences and their relationships and their upbringing and so forth, that I think it's, you know, I mean, like, I've been told so many things over the last couple of days that, you know, I went to boarding school with 2 Aboriginal children, and they were grateful for the opportunities that they had and so forth. And, you know, I grew up next to an Aboriginal mission, and all of them, they were really happy that they were living there and so forth. And I thought, like, you know, you can't tell me, like, sure, I'm like, you know, I'm not saying that Aboriginal people lived in complete and utter misery that lived on missions, but you can't tell me that they were happy to not have human rights, to not have equal opportunities. You can't tell me that that evoked feelings of happiness. You know, like, you know, it's delusional, but it's these things that they sort of raise to sort of, I don't know, like, help themselves manage their emotions or their feelings towards that guilt or whatever it was. And like, I don't know. I find it really difficult. When people try to justify, especially that this was in somehow people's best interest, or, well, if Australia was invaded by the Japanese, you'd be so much worse off, that somehow compensates the rape and the massacres that took place here, because if, you know, it could be worse if the Japanese did it. Like, you know, like, I don't know how it's relevant like to the conversation, or that it somehow takes away from what happened and what continues to happen now. And I suppose this is the thing, like, I can just to give a bit of context, that the comments that we received, they started when we shared a new book that we're stocking. It's called My Kind by Eddie Betts. So people were having a go about that. Then they sort of like were scrolling through our feed, and they saw Doug Leffler and Coral Vass's book sorry day, you know, which we were all sharing and so forth. And then, you know, oh, I'm not sorry. What have I got to be sorry for? And like, you know, when are we going to get over it? How many days do you need to have? You know, it's always an Aboriginal day for something, like going on about this. And then obviously going on about Bruce Pascoe and Adam Goods and people that seem to evoke these sort of passionate feelings in racist. Can I swear on podcasts? I don't know. I probably won't. I'll just. And I think a lot of those people, like, I don't argue with trolls. I don't feed it. I don't engage in conversation. I block and delete and I move on. But I think there is also a real lack of awareness of the current affairs and issues, like other than the stuff that's happening in Alice Springs at the moment that's made it onto mainstream media.
Yeah.
There's still not a whole lot of awareness on the actual statistics of the Closing the Gap report and the Family Matters report and so forth. And you were a guest speaker at our last yarning circle that we did, and one of our educators talked about the Closing the Gap report, and like, you know, obviously we could see an increase of attendance of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children attending early learning services. But we talked about the difference between attendance versus engagement, or enrollment versus engagement, and whether or not those services are culturally safe, and what are people's experiences being in these services and all that kind of stuff. So while sometimes the statistics can look good, it still doesn't tell us all that we need to know.
The whole picture, is it really?
It's not. I mean, I guess that's a step in the right direction. Don't get me wrong, but I do think that there's more to it than just going, oh yeah, well, we can see that they're on track in early childhood. No. We've got a long way to go in early childhood.
100%.
So I guess like when we look at this, educators promote this learning for all children when they, for example, create opportunities for open and authentic partnerships with all families, communities and organisations, including with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and organisations and those from culturally diverse backgrounds. Model practices that create a culture of inclusion and social justice within the setting and community, and build partnerships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and organisations that are genuine and sustainable. So we've talked at length in one of our previous episodes about building those community connections and that engagement. But that social justice piece, I suppose I'm a huge advocate for the anti-bias approach in early childhood. I think we're up to the 4th or the 5th edition now. But essentially, the 4 goals of that is that, like, you know, number one, children have a strong sense of identities. This is not just Aboriginal children, this is all children. You know, the anti-bias approach looks at all aspects of diversity. So all children have a right to feel good about who they are and where they are from. And people that don't feel good about who they are, I think, and where they are from, you know, are insecure, which is potentially why they're projecting that onto other people. So everybody has that sense of belonging. The second is that children have respect for diversity, that they have accurate language to describe human difference, and that they see diversity as being an asset instead of a deficit. The third is that children can recognise unfairness. And the fourth is that they have the strategies and confidence and skills to stand up and take action against it. To stand up and take action against racism and prejudice and discrimination and so forth, which I think these are goals that we would want all children to have, right? That they feel good about who they are, that they respect people that are different from them, that they're able to recognise when somebody themselves or somebody else is being treated unfairly and they can call it out and do something about it. I don't see how that is negative for any child, you know. Do you work with the anti-bias approach in, well, you wouldn't necessarily in primary, but have you had experience working with it in early childhood?
Not really, Jess, to be honest. It's not like, I know a little bit about it, but it's not something that I guess I'm actively using, although I probably feel like I should be.
Yeah, look, it's a great guide, and like it came with Louise Derman Sparks in the 80s. And it's something that I refer educators to a lot, because a lot of the processes and principles and practices that we are talking about and yarning about in reference to Aboriginal perspectives, it's the same for other aspects of diversity as well. It's exactly the same. What I've seen in terms of being able to recognise that, I know that a lot of our listeners would be familiar with like the Fly the Flag campaign, which a lot of early learning services were actively involved in, trying to get the Aboriginal flag permanently on top of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, of which it is now, you know, and that, and the early childhood settings involvement in that started when the child that was attending a preschool in North Sydney was going over the Harbour Bridge with his mum and looked up and sort of said, like, why isn't the Aboriginal flag on top of the bridge? It's their land. It should be there. And there was already a campaign in that space, and so they got behind that and recruited more and more and more early childhood services and collected over 10,000 signatures from services right around the country and really campaigned and advocated for that. And I've also seen things like that social justice piece in terms of respect for land and respect for country, and children actually saying, this is disrespectful to Aboriginal people and their land when there's rubbish in the waterways and pollution and so forth. So what can we do about that? And getting involved in movements like Take 3 for the Sea. I've seen educators and children campaigning for not cutting down like grandmother trees and stuff that are on country as well. So really, I guess, being aware of issues. So again, those current affairs and issues, and again, which is a wrap action, for those that have that. So subscribing to publications like the Koori Mail, so the fortnightly Aboriginal newspaper, so you're becoming aware and informed on what the issues are in community today, and sharing that with children. We know that children should be exposed to a range of different media, and you're not telling children what to think, and I just want to be clear on that. It's not about saying to children, this is what you must think. It's about exposing children and to provocations and building their sense of awareness about their community, of which they are citizens of, and getting them to think critically about whether something is fair or not fair, and what they would do. And so we also use books, not an Aboriginal book, but it's a book that's called If I Were Prime Minister, and getting children to think about, well, how are laws made and who gets to make those laws, and consider what is in the country's best interest. And so if you were Prime Minister, what laws and decisions would you make that would make Australia a better country for everybody? What would you like to change? What would you like to do? I've also seen educators and children write letters to the Australian Prime Minister talking to them about community, and that was really prevalent during the referendum. And I saw lots of children writing letters to their MPs and talking about what they think should happen and their concerns. So I think that's just been my experience in general. Yeah,
that's awesome. Actually, we wrote letters to the Prime Minister last year, and the kids were so amazed when he actually wrote back. It was there's so much. I think even I think I've yarned about this before, Jess, but that book, The Rabbits?
Oh yeah, by Sean Tan.
By John Marsden.
Oh, is it Sean?
Yeah, Sean Tan's the illustrator.
It's illustrator, yes. Yeah.
Like I think that's a really amazing book to read. Like, I mean, there's some parts I kind of skip through, like, because there is a section in there about they stole our baby, so I don't use that page for children in early childhood. But certainly for this particular outcome, it talks about like children understanding and showing empathy as well. And I think that's a great book to use to talk about I guess the adversity that our people have faced, and doing so in like the kids get it, like it's just so gettable. Oh gosh.
Well, I think that's the thing is that children do get it. It's not children that have the issue with it, like 100%. Children do absolutely seem to just get it. But when I look at that, one of the other outcomes of outcome 2, children become aware of fairness. It's essentially, if you really read it, it's all these anti-biased approaches and points that I was just talking about. So children become aware of ways in which people are included or excluded from physical and social environments. They understand what it means to be treated fairly and to treat others fairly. They develop the ability to recognise unfairness and bias and the capacity to act with compassion and kindness. They appreciate and respect different ways of knowing, being, and doing. They engage with concepts of citizenship, social justice, and equity, taking action to help communities in distress following fires, floods, and drought. And educators promote this when they notice and listen carefully to children's concerns and explore diverse perspectives on issues of inclusion and exclusion and fair and unfair behaviour. They provide materials, texts, and resources that are inclusive of gender, ability, ethnicity, culture, language, and family diversity. They provide equitable opportunities for children to include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children and children who have diverse capabilities to contribute positively to their world. They seek guidance from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders and community members about local processes and protocols, histories, and culture. There you go, everybody. It's page 42. And next time somebody asks you, like, why are you reading Sorry Day or Somebody's Land, some other books that are in that same vein are stories by Simon, Daybreak by Amy Maguire, Sacred Hill by Gordon Hookey. There's Tell Me Why is another one. There's a heap. Fair Skin Blackfella is another one. So many great texts that you can be standing behind to approach these conversations in your classroom with children. But this is where it tells you that, you know, this is what we are required to do. It's not you pushing your political agenda onto children.
Yeah.
And it's not just about saying like we're required to do it, therefore we should do it. I mean, we should do it because we value the importance of it, but we also need to do it in an informed and measured and mindful way, that we're not traumatizing children that we have in our classrooms either, but we're able to expose them in an age-appropriate way to Australia's history. And this is part of teaching about reconciliation. Historical acceptance is a key part of reconciliation. It's one of the 5 elements of reconciliation. And we are required to teach about reconciliation, not just during Reconciliation Week, so not just between the 27th of May and the 3rd of June, but throughout the whole year. So how are you teaching children about race relations and unity and equality and equity and historical acceptance all year round? The last one is institutional integrity, which is something that we do outside of the classroom, essentially. But those other things are things that we should be considering all the time. What is our part in this? So something that we did very simply, I think it was in one of our play school episodes. I just can't remember which one. I think it was our Walking Together episode, which we did in for a Reconciliation Week episode. And we did the timeline of footprints. So it started with, I think it was Hunter that was walking and doing his painted footprints. And then he was joined by the presenter who was like saying, like, my people have been here for a long time. And like, it goes all the way back. And then we didn't always walk together, but now we're going to move forward and we're going to walk together as one. That's what reconciliation is. So sometimes just having like those tangible experiences that children can also visualize is another way that we can talk about reconciliation. But you should check out that episode as well, because it's a good resource, and the educated notes that go with it. To talk to children about what reconciliation, the broader concept of what reconciliation means. And I think we deliberately called it Walking Together and not reconciliation as well, because for me, the term reconciliation is a little bit contentious, because I think we might have mentioned this before, as it sort of insinuates that there was some sort of conciliation, there was some sort of agreement, and then there was a breakaway from that, and now we're trying to reconcile it. What we sort of say is that there's never an agreement, there was never a treaty, there was never anything like that. So how can we reconcile something that was never agreed upon in the first place, I suppose? So I totally get the term and why people kind of rebuke that a little bit. But for me, it's more about the embodiment of the elements of reconciliation and what it represents that I think is really important. And that's more the practical things of what we should be doing in our classroom with children every day and advocating for. Sorry.
I think too, Jess, on that is like, while we're not presenting those points of view, those Aboriginal points of view about colonisation, about that trauma, about adversity, obviously in a child-friendly way, you know, like I know my son, who's now 10, you know, he's been asking questions since he was probably 3 years old. He knew by the time he was 4 years old that white people came here, that his pop's family came on the first fleet, but that, you know, other members of his family were already here, and generations and tens of thousands of years before that. Our kids have knowledge about stuff, about culture, about trauma. Unfortunately, our kids probably know more than other kids about some of that stuff that they should. But that's the reality of intergenerational trauma, isn't it? That we're exposed to that through community, through family lines, like even through like at home or whatever. And so we're not so our children come with this lived experience, with this wealth of information. If we're not presenting that side of the story, we're just perpetuating that ongoing cycle of like that historical blind spot, and just missing that, like, and just presenting that biased view about Eurocentric ideas again. So it's so important, really. There's no reason, there's no not important part about it. Like,
I think what I struggle with is that including Aboriginal perspectives has almost become a fashionable thing for educators to do. And originally it started with like, do we tell dreaming stories? What about dot painting, the didgeridoo and bush tucker and so forth, and that kind of really comfort level surface stuff. And that's okay. People have to enter where they feel comfortable and what they are aware of the culture, and you grow that knowledge. And when we know better, we can do better, and we can delve deeper into our practice. But for me, like as Aboriginal people, we don't get the privilege of not being aware of politics and how that shapes and influences us and our children and families and communities. And I feel like that's it makes educators feel uncomfortable talking about it, makes educators feel very uncomfortable. And that's what we've been called to do, is to move our practice from safe to brave. So are you just staying safe? Are you just looking at, oh, what is the Aboriginal perspective of hospitals, and what is the Aboriginal perspectives of, you know, under the sea? And those things are important. It's not that they're not, but, you know, what are you doing to be brave and to actually be an ally? And I can't remember the quote, but it's like, to be an ally means that like you're standing up in a sense, and you're taking some of those hits for us as well. And you can do that in lots of different ways. And it's not, people sort of think to be an ally or to engage in social justice is to march in Invasion Day protests and all that sort of stuff. And like that is one way, and having protest marches is an important thing. However, it's not the only way that you can do advocacy work. You know, writing to your MPs, writing educational pieces for, you know, ECA's journals or the sector or whatever, or putting out social media posts on your personal profiles or on your Facebook, you know, business Facebook pages or service Facebook pages, or sharing, amplifying the voices of, you know, Aboriginal community members and spokespeople who are experts, who are able to voice, and so forth. I think those are all things that we can do. Education, I say this all the time, is the strongest form of advocacy that there is. And so, you know, when you can educate and, like, you know, broaden somebody's worldview, help them understand and take the time to have those conversations, and to mentor other educators who are entering the profession or perhaps haven't had the same experience and exposure as you. Those are all forms of allyship in my eyes as well, is that you're taking some of that load, that education load, off of Aboriginal communities and families by taking some of that on yourselves. One of the things that I asked my community to do, like during the last couple of days anyway, is like to go and engage with our Facebook page in a positive way, because how the Facebook algorithm works is that if racist people like and comment on your page, it shows your content to people, other people that are like-minded, the same as them. You know what I mean? Because it's like
terrible.
Yeah, right. So it's like, you know, it kind of looks at common interests and common goals and so forth. So it's like, oh, you know, 20 people from this particular group have all commented on this page, therefore their content must be of interest to other members of the people that are in that group. So we're going to show that content to more of those people. So I've said, can you engage in our stuff? Like, even if you like it, share it, you know, like you don't have to comment if you don't want to, you don't have to share it. Those things are great, but just liking it, it swings the pendulum back the other way, that it starts to show my content again to educators and people that are actually like-minded and want to know and want to engage with us. So that's why I say, like, engage with like content creators, our posts, because it helps. Like, even like despite all of this, like even if you're not going to purchase something from us or you're not needing our services or whatever, it will show our stuff to people that are like you that potentially will. And that's just another way that you can support Aboriginal businesses and encourage us to keep going with what we do. But particularly during those key times where racists come out. So like I said, this isn't even a key time, but, you know, particularly during NAIDOC week and reconciliation week, I can tell you we get absolutely hammered. It's really important, like, that you show up during those times, because it can be completely mentally draining and overwhelming to have to get up and have to read that stuff every day.
When you're living that, you know, like you're living that day to day anyway, often, you know, so it's like then you open that screen. And I think it's a really good point, Jess, for educators to be aware of providing that solidarity around their Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander colleagues during those like times as well, because that is a heavy load, like especially when we're talking about like reconciliation week. It's not a celebration, it's like a commemoration of where we've been and how we get to, you know, a more accepting place between both of us, both groups of people getting along and all of that. And that load is heavy, you know, because all of our families have been affected by some kind of policy or practice or experience. And so, you know, it's a good reminder to rally around your Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander staff at those moments and just, you know, just touch base with them and see how they're feeling. And I don't know, just being mindful of that cultural load that they're carrying every day, but, you know, especially like you're saying around those key times.
I also would like say, look, it's a little bit different, like with Koori curriculum, like we get tagged into posts and arguments and debates on social media all the time.
Really?
But all the time. Like when people are sort of saying like, oh, this person wants to do this, like, what do you think about that? And like, sometimes like, so it used to be to get us to have an opinion and to educate. Now it's sort of changed a little bit. We'll get tagged in to sort of say we have good resources and go over there, which is in part why we created those resources. So I could stop having to repeat myself and just refer people to the guides that we had created to say, read this, because I, you know, like if you actually want to know my opinion, then read this and then get back to me and I'll answer your questions. And that saved me a lot of emotional duress, I suppose. So that served me well. But I would say to educators, like, don't tag your Black friends and colleagues in social media debates where people are saying that sort of stuff. Like, you know enough to know that what they're saying is wrong or not okay. So you speak up, you say it, because I don't think people realize like the amount that we're dragged into. For me, I feel like you're going to get to this point as well, Belinda. Like for me, I think it's different. Like I've signed myself up for it. I'm in that position. And I'm getting more tactful as to how I go about approaching it. So like I'm a bit more protected than that. But I would definitely say that to like, you know, you're like to people that are not putting themselves out as an Aboriginal early childhood consultant and not making themselves actively and freely available to do that work. Don't tag them in it because it's not good for their well-being at all.
No.
At all. So I guess like the only other point, I mean, like there's so much in outcome two. I feel like the same, like, you know, instead of just doing like one episode per thing, it has to be like one episode, like outcome 2.1, outcome 2.2, outcome 2.3.
100%.
Because like the same thing again here. So like this, another one was children become socially responsible and show respect for the environment. And that a whole idea of custodianship and acknowledgement of country and stewardship and how we get children engaged with that and caring for country. And so I think it's just another call as to why like caring for country and acknowledgements of country are so important in our practice. It's like, yes, but what I love about the early years learning framework is now that they're saying we are required to do it. You know, before it was just like, you should be doing these things, but now it's like, no, like this is like what we have deemed as being best quality care and practice for you to be engaging with this work. And I'm going to refer in the show notes to our past episodes where we talked about this at length in our reconciliation action plan episodes. But we just had some questions that came through, Belinda, which I didn't tell you about before this episode. But anyway, there's only two. So one is from Sarah. She says, a question my team often ask is, how do you keep your RAP alive when there are so many competing agendas? Do you have any tips for that?
Well, I think it's about just making time for it and space for it. So, you know, I always recommend, and I think we yarned about this in some of our previous podcasts, but, you know, making sure that you've got your RAP, like there's a RAP agenda item on your staff meeting that keeps you accountable. I also think what I've seen happen a lot is that once educators like do their first publishing of the RAP, like that's the end of the story, which just isn't effective in any way. It just is the beginning of that journey. So I just think you need to keep going with your RAP working party like forever, basically.
Yeah. For sure. I think like some key things I think is like you have it as a standing agenda item in your team meeting and you do it first up, not at the end where like you run out of time and you never get to talk about it. Like you do it at the beginning and it's a priority and you privilege it in your team meeting. So I think that's always there. I think you need to invest time initially when you're setting it up so that you have delegated the roles and responsibilities across your team and potentially you have sub-working groups. You might have a RAP working group that manages and oversees, and you have sub-working groups that sit underneath that. And by making sure that it's evenly spread, it helps with accountability, but it also makes sure that no one person is overwhelmed trying to do it all on top of 100%. Everything else, but it's being shared evenly and equally. I think that's really important. The other thing was evenly and equitably. That was one of the points. Sorry, I've lost my train of thought here. It's gone. It's completely gone from my head. Pardon?
Was it another question or not?
Oh, no, sorry. And the other thing I was going to say is that don't expect educators to do this in their programming time already, that they're using for their documentation and their planning and their observations and all that sort of stuff. They need to have separate time to work on their RAP actions.
Yeah.
And so this is like that SMART goal process, is
Yeah.
that it needs to be specific, measurable, achievable, relatable, and time specific.
Yeah.
And so if you have 100 competing agendas, then when you're setting out the deliverables and the timelines, then take that into account to make sure that there's adequate time for people to achieve, that it is achievable what you're asking them to do, and that you've also provided time for them to do it, that you're not expecting them to do it at home on their weekends, within time that is already completely full during their observations and so forth. And if you know that you have staff shortages, that you don't have casuals, and that people aren't getting their regular programming time, then be mindful of how many RAP actions that you're choosing to try and achieve 100%. At any one given time. Do less. It's not a race, so just do less. That's what I would probably just say. And then Hakia has asked, I often recommend your resources to teachers in primary and even secondary. Often I find the concepts and ideas discussed can often translate into education in general. What are your thoughts on First Nations education beyond early years education? What resources can educators use throughout a child's education? You're probably a better place to answer this than me.
But I mean, I guess it's like, how long is a piece of string? It goes everywhere, doesn't it? I think it's about having that understanding about, because a lot of it, you can fit Aboriginal perspectives into the curriculum anywhere. They have these cross oh gosh, what's it called now? There's like a Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cross culture. Oh, I can't think of the word, but anyway, it's like an elaboration under curriculum outcomes that give you Aboriginal perspective ideas.
Yeah.
But apart from that, like I generally don't use those elaborations, to be honest. I just embed it anywhere else because I think it's important to be able to know how to do that. But I think again, it comes back to knowing like how to find an authentic and appropriate resource, because there's resources for everything. There's resources for STEM. There's there's like science and technology, like videos and books and like games, and like there's just so many resources, like amazing. I was looking around some stuff. I'm trying to update my our business website, and I'm like, there's so much good stuff out there. Like, how, I was even kind of questioning like, how am I any different to all the other amazing stuff that's out there? It's just that I'm a different person, with maybe some different lived experiences or whatnot. But I think a lot of it comes down to knowing like, where are those resources, how to look for a good resource. I especially love, like there's a lot of focus on in science in like primary schools around like seasonal knowledge and stuff. And there's some great like information. There's a Indigenous section, like cultural knowledge section on the Bureau of Meteorology. Meteorology.
Say it either.
Oh gosh, I'm terrible with English, I swear. So yeah, it's everywhere. It's everywhere. You just have to know how to find the right resources, I think. And then like even I guess too, Jess, probably the only other thing, like in kindergarten, there is a lot of opportunities for play. So, they'll have like certain times of the day or certain times of the week where they do, dramatic play or just free time, really. So I would love to see some more, like personally, like in the kindergarten classrooms I've seen, I would love to see some more Aboriginal resource, like actual, dolls or, games or whatnot. I just don't see much of it when I do go into schools. And I think that's an area that we could be improving on as well.
Yeah, I think it's like totally. It's probably because like with my early childhood hat on, but like we're already looking like at primary schools for my daughter and son, and the Central Coast, like you kind of have to you have to like get in early if you want to send them somewhere different. And so like one of the schools that we're looking at, they do play-based learning in primary, which is one of the reasons that we're choosing it, because knowing that they're nonverbal learners, like knowing through doing, and like not just sitting at a desk all day. And they do like walker style learning, which is important for us. So it's one of the things that I also think, like, being aware of the 8 ways of learning and different ways of knowing, being, and doing, particularly for Aboriginal children, is really important. And it's something that that we are intentionally taking into consideration as we look for schools for her. Other resources, I suppose, and again, resources, such a huge umbrella, but I mean, like reconciliation action plans are something that like I recommend for early learning services, primary and secondary. That's a great
100%.
resource. There's lots of curriculum content and resources that you can be working your way through for all of those. So that to me is like always my number one resource, no matter what aspect of education I'm working in, is to get yourself going with a wrap. Secondary to that, I mean, like get onto Supply Nation, understand that there are lots of cultural service providers. Wingaru education is great, I think, for in the primary space. We sell a lot of their physical resources via Koori curriculum, like our bush tucker research cards and eels and traps. And we've just got a bingo game that's come in and a dominoes game and so forth. And they have some great resources. They also have lots of awesome interactive lesson plans and computer programs via Wingaru. So I recommend them. Tipiak is like another consultancy that's in this space, and they've actually started a podcast, so we can link their podcast in here as well. And I know that they sort of are more so, you know, in that primary space, and I've only ever heard good things about Tipiak. And then, like, you know, being like when you're looking at English and stuff, like what books are you reading? So Hakia Hustler, who asked this question, she's got some great novels which we'll link. But I mean, like the one that everyone's raving about at the moment is Wheeler. Have you got Wheeler?
Yeah, we got them out for the library. Yeah,
so good. The third book's about to come out. So this is by Jordan Gould and Richard Pritchard, and they were both presenters on the Koori Curriculum Book Summit. So we still have those book recordings available, and they presented on Wheeler and gave heaps of ideas of how we could extend upon that in the classroom. I'm so excited. This book for sure is going to make it into an animation or movie at some point because it's just unbelievable.
Maybe the first Disney movie. That's what I keep saying. When are we going to have a black Disney movie?
Cannot wait.
But and how's it going to work with American accents? I see how that fits. But anyway.
Then we've got like Koori Tutt. He's like Deadly Science series, looking at the STEM stuff. This book, Thinks You're Deadly, awesome. And then Isaiah Firebrace, his Come Together book. Love his stuff as well. So I mean, like I feel like there are heaps and heaps of resources, and I can probably do a little link to some of my top primary resources, which we'll pop in the show notes. And Belinda, if you can think of any as well, we'll link them in the show notes of this episode. And there's also some good Facebook groups that we can probably think of and link in. And if any of our listeners can think of like a favorite resource that they use or that they would like to share with us, we're happy to collect them and add them as we go. But thanks so much for the questions, Sarah and Hakia. We really appreciate it. We love getting questions. We have been asking people for questions this whole time, so to get some, it's awesome. Silent, yes, love it. So, you know, keep them coming. And yeah, I think we're out of time for this episode anyway. So that's gone so quick.
Yes, can you just share one amazing resource that you know, that relates to this outcome particularly? So one of my in-laws has created this amazing song called Bilwali, and it's a language song from Yagal country, like up in Yamba. But it talks about, like, with this outcome, we're talking about that interconnectedness between people and the environment. And the song is all about how we as Aboriginal people are interconnected and like we are one. Like that's what it talks about in the song, is that we are one with the environment and we're all connected. So I'll see if we can share the link to that one. And my little son loves it because his name is in the song and he listens to it to go to bed every night. Like that's his going to bed song. It's a beautiful song. I just wanted to take an opportunity to share it.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, please link. I think we also said that we were going to reach out to them and see if we could get permission to play it on one of these episodes. Do you want to ask them?
Yeah.
Oh, sure. We'll see how we go. Anyway, stay tuned, people that are listening. You never know. We could have a special introduction for our next episode. Fingers crossed. Awesome. Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you've enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review. It really does help. It goes a long way. It supports the work that Belinda and I are trying to do in this space. And we'll be back again next week. Thanks for listening.
Stay deadly.